Hello everybody, welcome to this video. I'm talking to you today about theories of translation, somehow theories of translation in relation to practice and our work as translators. I am Mohammed Abourisha and I am a translator and researcher, so welcome everybody. Today's video is going to be about something that everybody has talked about. It's about literal versus free translation, so to speak. Now, aside from the theories of translation that talk about the spectrum extending from the word-to-word translation up to adaptation following Peter Newmark's theories or the formal and dynamic equivalence following Snyder's theories, I'm not going to talk about them in details, but I will just address an issue. Many people say we read something and it is literally translated. We find that it, yes, has the same meaning of the original text, but we do not understand anything because it is too literal. It doesn't seem Arabic, for example, if it's translated from English into Arabic. We expect something to be natural, something that we can understand. On the other hand, other people would say and complain that the translation of the given text is too free. In other words, the translator is changing everything. So maybe literal translation is more or less understood by people, but what about free translation? What's wrong with the free translation? I remember one day that a researcher talked about the translation of jokes, and she said that the best translation of what did Peanut say to another peanut? And the answer is nothing. Peanuts cannot talk. And she says that translation of that into Arabic is simply to say, if the cat number 1 is the mother of cat number 2 and cat number 2 is the neighbor of cat number 3, how does the first cat call the second cat or the third cat? And the answer is meow. That's all. So this is a kind of free translation. You change everything according to this example, and people would have to complain that it's too free, it does not have the same intentional meaning of the text. And this brings us to something very important about translation: authenticity versus readability. In other words, do you want the translation to be authentic? Do you want it to be loyal to the author? Or do you want it to be readable by the reader? Something similar to the experience of the readership so that they can understand and communicate. Many people and researchers talked about translation as a communicative act and a pragmatic act, and they say that it has a function and it has to communicate, otherwise they will translate at all. Maybe the scholars' theories would agree that any text should have a function, and without the translation of the function, even if you translate the letter, it wouldn't be useful because you have to translate the spirit as well. So all of these things are in theory, so what's the problem here? Eugene Snyder says that translations are like women, homely when they are faithful and faithful when they are lovely, unfaithful when they are lovely, he says. In other words, literal translation is ugly, he says, and just free translation is beautiful. So what makes translation literal? What does it make it free, and how to choose between them? Basically, in my experience, when you translate something using literal translation, it is not really a problem. The problem is that when you use literal translation in the wrong way. What does it mean when you use it in the wrong way? And we will then discuss the free translation later on. We have several examples and I will choose some of them. In Arabic, we rely in Arabic on cohesive devices, on cohesion, because Arabic is a cohesion-based language, unlike English, which is a coherence-based language. So, when you translate from English into Arabic and observing every full stop in English, putting the same full stop in Arabic and starting the same sentence with the same subject, with the same verb, that's going to be very ugly translation. It's not going to be communicative at all. The simple reason is that Arabic is cohesive. You have to link two sentences together. You have to try to discern the cohesion between the two sentences. This is what I do usually in my translation. When I translate from English into Arabic, I try to understand what's the relationship between the two sentences. Is it, for example, contrast? Is it comparison? Is it just conjunction? And I have to add some words in order to make them link together. I have to see if there is reason or result or whatsoever to say, for example, because or as a result of, or any other expression in Arabic that suits the cohesive device intended in the original text. Now, if of course I do not use cohesive devices, I am too little and I am just making a problem. Translation is not going to be communicative, it's not communicating any message to the reader. The second thing has to do with equivalence, and when we talk about equivalence, usually we're talking about culture. So what's the problem with equivalence? People of equivalence talked about the equivalence on the sentence level, on the word level, on the phrase level, on the collocation level, on the text level, etc., etc., etc. So let's take some examples about that. Let's say that we have just a word like, for example, like privatization. Now this word is very new, relatively very new. It started with the globalization, privatization, etc. And the only way for saying that in Arabic was simply to invent a word. Until this moment, believe me or not, still people in the Arab world do not agree on the possible term for privatization. They have several problems in translating it. Anyway, they still have some words that can be understood by people now, although the term is relatively new, as I said. Now we have other terms. For example, if you say inclusive education, this is another term which is a bit difficult to translate, because usually the literal translation is التعليم الدامج or التعليم الشامل, التعليم الجامع. Still people do not agree on that. Since people do not agree on a term, it means that it does not exist in Arabic at all. Because what's the benefit of having a term in Arabic that does not have the agreement of people? It's like money, you know, by the way, money, the definition of money, it is something that people agree on to use for their sellings, for their buying, and all of them agree on that. The words are like money. So without the existence of such words, it's going to be difficult to translate. Another word that occurs to my mind, I think it is operational. Unlike operation, عمليات, what about operational? It doesn't have any word in Arabic. People try to invent, and even if they say عمليات or whatsoever, it doesn't really ring a bell in the minds of the readers. We don't understand what's really meaning by this, what this simple word mean. We don't understand it. Now we have other problems with the words. I'm talking about the equivalence level on the word level. We have words when they are related to culture. Let's see what will happen. Now, for example, if I say in English, come out of the closet, or come out. This is a problem, because in Arabic it is يجاهر. It is, in other words, to go and expose oneself as doing something, and he's not ashamed of doing it, and he says, I don't care if people do not like what I say or not. This is in English, this is the meaning of English, and in Arabic, يجاهر, surprisingly, we have two connotations. One is very negative and the second is very positive. So whenever a reader is going to read the word يجاهر, if you translate coming out as يجاهر, we have either of two connections. The first one, people will connect it to يجاهر بالمعصية, which means to say to people, I am doing the sin and I'm not ashamed of myself as a sinner, as somebody who's doing something immoral, something bad. On the other hand, people would simply say, it reminds us of the al-jahr bid-da'wah. It is when the first and early Muslims came out and declared Islam to all people. So people would misunderstand the word come out, maybe if translated from English into Arabic. Now this is very interesting, because people would say there is no problem in come out if you translate it in Arabic, as long as there is context. And this is a key word, and we will discuss it here. The issue is that if you just search on the internet and try to find something about the left brain and right brain, then you can see that theorists and educators, psychologists, especially in cognitive psychology, people say that whenever you receive a piece of idea into your mind quickly works. And the mind loves patterns, it loves context, it loves connections, and it automatically randomly connects every single word that you hear with anything in your mind. So when you hear the word come out of the closet, if you translate it as يجاهر, the Arab reader immediately will try to link it to something that he already knows. We're talking here about the heuristic checklist maybe of Sa'd ad-Din, which corresponds also to another checklist by Delheims. We're talking about the norm of interpretation, the background information, in other words. So the norm of interpretation would tell us something about the background information that we have, the context that we have, and the mind is very skillful in trying to find connections, trying to find patterns. It loves this game, so to speak. So what will happen? The mind will immediately try to find something in its culture in order to try to understand the word. If the concept does not exist at all, like operation for example, the mind will simply say, I don't understand it. Even if it's there in the context of the lexicons or dictionaries or whatsoever. Now, if it links to another concept and maybe it is negative or positive or whatsoever, this is another problem, because you may say something which is positive in English, but in translation it's negative, or the vice versa, as I said about coming out. There is another one which is sponsorship. For example, in Canada, if a refugee applies for sponsorship and not for refugee, for asylum, and he says that he has people who will sponsor him, who will pay for him during his stay for the first year at least in Canada, then he might be admitted. Sponsorship, if you translate it to Arabic, it is al-kafala. And al-kafala has also a positive solidarity concept in Arabic. For that reason we can understand immediately, because we have kafalat al-yatim, sponsorship of orphans. We have al-kafala of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because when he was an orphan, he was sponsored first of all by his grandfather and then by his uncle after the death of his grandfather. So we have it, we have no problem in it. And this reminds of Dibu Grand when he said, equivalence lies in the expectations of the target readership. In other words, we have some words that have different concepts, and words that have the same concepts. But what about Paulo Coelho? Well, what does he have to do with our discussion? Well, we can just cite some example of Paulo Coelho. Paulo Coelho is a writer, and he wrote the first best-selling Alchemist, and I read it, by the way, and I was very surprised to see certain signs, motifs, so to speak, that are contradictory with the Islamic tradition. So I was just wondering, if Paulo Coelho translated this novel into Arabic, would people be able to understand his philosophy? And the answer is no, unfortunately. To the best of my knowledge, he will not pass on his message to the Arab reader. Why? For example, in one of the sentences that I read in in this novel, I think it was Santiago who said, he was talking about the birds, and he said, Allah, which is God, has taught me the languages of the birds. Now let's just translate it to Arabic. Allahu allamani mantiqa at-tayr. This is a problem, because it's mentioned in the Quran, it's only the monopoly of Prophet Solomon. Only Prophet Solomon could understand the languages of the birds. And it's mentioned in the Quran. And the Quran says that it's only Solomon that he was given such a gift, because he prayed to God and asked God to give him a wealth that shall not be given to any person after him, including this wealth, including, of course, the language of the birds. And the language of the bird itself is really mentioned in the Quran as one of the gifts to Prophet Solomon, peace be upon him. So if I read in Arabic, Paulo Coelho, Alchemist, I read Santiago saying that God taught him the language of the bird, what should I understand as an Arab reader? I will immediately connect it to my background information about the birds and the languages, and all the Prophet Solomon could understand it. So it's contradictory, it doesn't make any sense to me. In other words, I will not be able to understand the philosophy of Paulo Coelho, in other words. I hope this is understood for the concepts, and they are different between one language and another. So let's say that we have such problems on the word levels or phrase levels or connotation levels, etc. When we translate an article from English into Arabic, what will happen? The first thing that will happen is that the translator has a brain, we agree on that, and he has left brain, right brain, we also agree on that, although some researchers say it's just something ridiculous to talk about half brain, left and right, etc. We're putting aside this controversy, we just say that it exists, and we say that we have two halves of the brain. Let's assume that it's something axiomatic, something that is true. So aside from this controversy, we say that the two brains are there, and what will happen when we talk about this matter. So, in fact, as a translator, whatever he reads, whether he likes it or not, he will try to connect it with his information, with his background information, to make meaningful understanding of what he reads. In other words, this reminds us of people who say in translation theories that translation is subjective, because whether we like it or not, the translator is going to interpret what the writer says in the first place, and he will try to feed his own beliefs in the translation, whether we like it or not. Now, if the translator does not do this exercise, the result will be literal translation. It's going to be word-for-word translation. We will explain why the translator uses this way of writing it. If he tries to move and add words in order to explain the meaning that cannot be understood in Arabic, as we explained in the previous examples, then he will try to interfere and he will try to negotiate the meaning. He will try to add something, to delete something, etc. And of course we have some people who say yes, some people who say no, but anyway, let's assume the translator does that. What will happen? In fact, he will make the message communicable, something that can be reached to the target readership. In other words, we have the Arabic readers. Now, how this happens? What's the problem here? The issue that we have is that the meaning, is it inside the text? No, it's not inside the text. According to several researchers, including philosopher Jacques Derrida and other people, meaning cannot be really specified in the text itself, because once the text is written, the reader will have several interpretations and he will understand it in his own way, and as a translator he will translate it in his own way. This reminds us of Plato when he talks about reality thrice removed from reality, from reality, because this is through poetry. Poetry removes us from reality 3 times, and this reminds us also of such criticism principles like in, for example, Ronald Barthes, this French philosopher, who said that the author, he believed in the death of the author. In other words, once the novelist writes something, we do not try to see what did he mean, how did he live in his childhood, did it affect his novel, etc. We don't care about this according to this theory. In other words, we try to understand and interpret what we have in our minds about what we read. And this is one example about the Scarlet Letter. For example, this is a novel written about adultery and a woman who committed adultery, and she had to wear the scarlet letter A. Throughout the novel she puts on the scarlet letter A. So what does A represent? Most obviously it's adultery, but if we follow the principle of death of the author, we try to imagine more signs at the same time. From the perspective of the community, yes, it's adultery. What about the woman? She's able to face up this society and say, yes, I committed a sin, but I can just atone for my sin. And it brings us for the father, for the one who committed adultery, the man. It is atonement. He tries to atone for his sin. And we have also the child, sperm. It's an angel, so it's A. It has, if we really try to understand what the writer wants to say, we are just going to be in the trouble of not giving a good interpretation or imagination. Now what will happen? When we have a text from the writer, why do people translate literally? This is because we do not have a brief. This is very important. What is a brief? According to Kristen Nord, a brief is something that the client gives to you before you start the job. And you have to interview this client. You have to understand all the intentions of the client. If there is anything that he writes and you feel that it doesn't have equivalence in Arabic, for example, it has equivalence but it links it to other experience there, it's something opposite to what the reader or the writer may intend to do, and then you have to talk to the writer and explain to him that this is what we have, do you want to change it or not? For example, if I want to translate the book of Alchemist, I would immediately say to Pablo, look, you say that San Diego understands the languages of the birds, but this contradicts what we have in Islam, and the readers will not understand your philosophy. I'm not talking about your idea, I'm not interfering with your idea, but this is what I'm telling you about the effect. The communication will be broken here. It will be orphanization, so to speak. Orphanization, I mean the connection between the real intention of the writer and the words on the text will be broken in the translation. So when we have this brief in the very beginning, we will be able to know what to do exactly. Let me give you an example about a brief. You have an article in a newspaper and the writer says to you, look, I have a problem, I don't know how to write, I just wrote this article in the newspaper. What I wanted you to do is to get the ideas, okay, present them in English, for example, from Arabic into English or vice versa, and make it beautiful. Now this brief is totally different from saying, look, this writer is writing something very important and I just want to understand every single word because I want to sue him in the court. This is totally different. What will happen if you do not have a brief? Now this is a problem. If you do not have a brief from the writer, you will be torn out between two things. The first one is it's going to be authenticity. In other words, you want to keep faithful to the text, to what the writer wants to say, and you are afraid because you do not want to say something that would anger the writer. The writer would say to you, I did not say that word, why did you mention that? And we do that in many of our translation work. Now, on the other hand, you would say, no, I will just try to use imagination and try to imagine what the writer wants to say and try to do it in the way that matches the experience of the reader talkership following the book and other people. In other words, I want to see the intentionality of the writer. If I don't see the intentionality of the writer through the brief, I try to imagine a brief and try to write in this way. So which one is good, which one is bad? In fact, both of them are like salt and sugar. You cannot put them everywhere, you cannot use them everywhere. You have to use them wisely and rationally and reasonably. So we do have lots of problems of work between English and Arabic, but mainly from English into Arabic we have problems with cohesion, as I said. We have problems with equivalence on the different levels, on the word level, text level, etc. Please check the internet everywhere to see the problems with equivalence, because many people talked about them with lots of examples. Words that do not have equivalence, lexical equivalence in Arabic. For example, words that have different connotations in Arabic than those in English, and a different concept, and most importantly, if you do not know the intention of the writer, this is a problem. Your translation will end up either in literal translation or free translation. When you use free translation, what will happen though is that in most cases you will take the risk and you will add something that you may not be sure 100% whether the writer wanted to say it or not. Well, I hope that this kind of brief introduction to the theories of translation in terms of practice that I talked about will be helpful to you. I would like also to invite you to see my articles on translation, and also I would like to invite you to see the work that I do in translation to understand more this theory. This is just a brief introduction, as I said, and next time hopefully we will get some text between English and Arabic, and I will explain them and I will show you what I mean by all of these procedures. So for now, thank you very much for listening to this video and watching it. I wish you all the best. See you next time with more deliberate and information about theories of translation in practice. Have a good day. Thank you very much. Goodbye.